That morning, Rudy was carrying a hot plate of food. She cheerfully carried the plate of food down the hallway, when suddenly she heard people whispering, "This is Our Lady." Rudy turned around and saw two maids talking to each other. They happily said to each other, "It seems like she's better than we thought. At first, when I heard a noble guest of the Lord was coming here, I was really scared." One of them sighed, "I heard that some nobles, if you make a stain on their clothes, will have you beaten until you bleed. I was so worried. I wondered if the lady would be someone like that." The other maid excitedly replied, "I love how much brighter the castle has become. Just her presence here has brought so much change." The two giggled, "Oh yes, indeed. At first, I didn't know how we would keep everything clean, but now. Just imagine. The other day, when the mage saved that tree, that was on the lady's orders too." Another voice added, "Yes, that way, the lady won't be gossiped about as someone living in a backwater place like Anatole. If the Lord hadn't coughed the dragons, would she have come here?" The other two reminded her, "Anne. What are you saying? Did I say something wrong? The Lord and lady's marriage was 3 years ago, so where has the lady been during that time? You all should wake up. Does a noble guest really come to live in this backwater village because she likes it?" Another maid laughed, "Oh, and even if you say that, this is the best fabric the lady has given us, and you chose it to make clothes." Anne blushed with embarrassment and said, "What are you talking about? Do you expect me to wear my old, worn-out clothes? No, I'm just saying that thanks to the lady, we have warmer clothes this winter. It's really good. You all, even if you argue, don't start waving your arms around." Judy stood outside listening and smiled as she walked away. Some knights passed by and cheerfully greeted Rudy. As she walked, she thought back, a few months ago, when the lady first arrived at this castle, just as there were those who were happy that Castle Calip finally had a mistress, there were also a few who didn't trust her. Rumors spread about her being of an exceptionally noble origin. There was doubt that the lady wouldn't care about managing the domain in the Lord's absence, and an inevitable wariness towards someone they didn't know. Only a few people from the beginning had shown genuine goodwill towards the lady. In fact, it was natural for most of the staff to feel uneasy around the lady, but still. Rudy knocked on the door and respectfully said, "My lady, my lord, I've brought breakfast." Massey, inside, responded, "Come in." As soon as Rudy opened the door, she was greeted by the sight of the two of them being affectionate on the bed. She cheerfully said, "I'll leave it here. Please eat before it gets cold." Rudy continued her earlier thoughts. However, the lady has taken care of the castle, and the appearance of the castle has gradually changed. Seeing the lady take care of what the people of Anatole cherish and love, the people here have slowly let go of their wariness. Rudy bowed her head, "Then I'll excuse myself." Massey smiled warmly and said, "Thank you, Rudy." Rudy was taken aback for a moment but smiled in return. In truth, the Lord's deep affection has greatly influenced the lady in this change. The Lord cherishes the lady as if holding a fragile gemstone. Even though he completes an enormous amount of work that would be too much for others even with 3 bodies, whenever he has time, his gaze is always on the lady. This has become a familiar sight for everyone in the castle. Although it seems the lady still isn't used to the Lord's attention, she certainly doesn't dislike it. Hopefully, every day in this castle will always be a peaceful day for the lady. The next morning, Massey went to the library again. Ruth couldn't help but praise her, "You have incredible skill and your learning speed is faster than expected." Massey, embarrassed, replied, "If you keep repeating something over and over, you'll naturally get faster at it." Ruth organized a pile of papers and said, "Thanks to that, we're now in the final stages. At this rate, you should be able to complete the spell by tomorrow." Massey stammered, "Before this, I didn't know that magic involved wrestling with documents. I thought it was something more magical." Ruth stretched and said, "Magic is an advanced field of study. It requires precise calculations and detailed research. The moment we get to experience the thrill is like being in a battle." Massey's eyes suddenly lit up. "So, Ruth, are you also a mage from the Tower of the World?" He fell silent, speechless with her. "Of course, I spent some time there," he said. Massey looked at him with great admiration. Ruth recounted, "I don't remember clearly, but back then, his face was handsome and bright. His physique didn't look like that of a 16-year-old, and his courage was heart-stirring. Lord Calip was already being called a madman by then. Massey was astonished. A madman? Ruth began to explain. The Tower of the World consists of 5 artificial islands created by ancient wizards, situated in the middle of the Aegean Ocean. It's a place known as the convergence of all the world's knowledge. It's a neutral zone that doesn't interfere with the internal affairs of any country and is an island of wisdom that upholds order for the world. Even a young girl who has never left her home alone would have heard about the strict upbringing of the mages of the Tower of the World. As soon as they are promoted to the esteemed status of a mage, that is the price they pay to learn all the dangerous and secret magic of the nodes. If that power is used recklessly, the world will be thrown into chaos. Therefore, there's no other option but to become a subject of surveillance. As a result, most of the lives of esteemed mages are spent within the Tower of the World. So I escaped, Ruth explained. Massey was puzzled. Is that even possible? Ruth chuckled. It's not. That's why now, if I come across a mage from the Tower of the World, I'll be treated as a criminal, labeled as a traitor. Massey was dismayed. Are all mages from the tower like this, without integrity? She bowed her head, pondering for a moment before asking, So, have you met Kristen while wandering around after leaving the Tower of the World? Ruth recalled, Yes, indeed. Shortly after I became a mercenary, he was already a famous figure. Massey was intrigued. How so? Ruth casually replied, He was a bit of a gambler. If he miscalculated even slightly, Lord Calip would have become a fistful of ashes. Massey raised an eyebrow. A madman? He truly was a fearless youth who plunged into the mouth of a dragon and did something incredibly insane by chopping off the dragon's skull, Ruth recounted, immediately covering her mouth, feeling sick at the memory. In recent years, I haven't seen him being as reckless anymore except when he fought the dragon. Massey's eyes widened. When he fought the dragon, what exactly did he do? Ruth explained that during the battle, Lord Calip temporarily absorbed external magical energy and used it as his own sword, a unique ability that wasn't innate but rather a physical transformation caused by regularly using the blood and body fluids of monsters. Letting people know, Lord Calip utilized that power to engage in direct combat with Burrard, the most powerful natural magic creature in the world. He then separated and absorbed that magical strength, afterwards using his sword to decapitate the dragon. Thanks to that foolish action, he gained a reputation as the bravest knight on the entire continent. Massey's heart pounded in his chest. I had no idea that his powerful deeds, always praised by others, were such reckless actions. He truly could have lost his life, and I would never have known, only left with the painful memories of that first night with him, forever unable to escape the dark room of Christ's mansion. She bowed her head in resignation. Perhaps it's indeed forever. Ruth suddenly noticed Massey's trembling figure. He hesitated. I didn't mean to make you fearful. Living among ruthless people, I've lost my sense of delicacy. This shouldn't have been said to the lady. Massey tightened her grip on her hand. It's because I asked first. She thought silently. It should be fine. The dragon is dead, and Ruth also mentioned that Kristen no longer engages in reckless actions. But when this winter passes, Kristen will be called upon by the king again and leave for another campaign because it's the duty of a noble, of a knight. What if he can't come back this time? What will happen to the people in Calip's castle and even to myself? The comfort and happiness that I thought I had achieved may not be as stable as I thought. When they returned to Kristen's room, he announced, In 2 days, I'll embark on a military campaign. Massey watched him take out his armor, stunned by the news. She couldn't believe it and stammered, Why, sir? Massey's mouth was dry as she asked, Where are you planning to go? Kristen replied, They've located the location of the goblin pack on the other side of the mountain. I intend to stay there for about 3 to 5 days to eradicate them completely. Massey worriedly exclaimed, That will be very dangerous. He chuckled, So now you're worried about me? She hesitantly replied, Yes, that's. Kristen reassured her, Eliminating these goblins may be troublesome, but it's not excessively dangerous. Compared to hunting down rabbit packs, it's slightly more irritating. Massey hesitated. If they're not too dangerous, then maybe it's okay. He looked at her seriously. Massey, my duty is to protect this land. Are you suggesting I neglect that duty? She startled. He scratched his head, explaining, goblins are low-level creatures, but they reproduce rapidly. If we don't eradicate them at the root, they'll multiply and become a significant threat. My mission is to prevent that from happening. Massey faltered. I'm sorry, I overstepped my bounds. Massey closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his embrace, reluctantly accepting it. That night, he held her as they slept, but Massey couldn't sleep. She silently pondered that she knew Kristen was an extraordinary person. Day in and day out, from dawn until late at night, he showed no signs of fatigue, constantly monitoring the territory without rest. She knew there was no need to worry about things not happening, but the thought of him having to sleep in the cold winter wind made her heart ache. Being the wife of a knight meant always being prepared for this lonely and cold loneliness, didn't it? Massey sighed, looking at her husband. Is the reason why other noble couples keep their distance and sleep in separate rooms because they don't want to experience this kind of pain? Her heart ached at the thought. If that's the case, then now, are we getting too close? The next day, a fireball was immediately launched and flew towards the protective wall of Anatole Fortress. The knights around were excited. The sound is still so loud. Kristen nodded approvingly. Well done. The magic artifacts are working very well. He then ordered the gates of the fortress to be opened. At this moment, Ruth appeared, leaving Kristen speechless. Is it really necessary to go this far? He asked. Kristen explained, because we will be absent from the territory, we must show everyone that Anatole is safe and secure like this, so that no one dares to invade Anatole one more times. Massey looked up at her husband. I see. So the demonstration earlier was not only to test the functionality of the magic artifacts but also to reassure the people. She then turned to look at the object behind her. Those two small magic artifacts could release such great power, but what were they made of? They were the size of pumpkins and smooth, with a white color like ivory. She asked Ruth, what are those magic artifacts made of? He replied nonchalantly, they are made from basilisk's bones. Massey was puzzled. Bones? Ruth crossed his arms and explained, because dragon-like creatures such as basilisks, whether they fly or crawl, have strong endurance, most magical tools are made from their bones. Hearing this, Massey shuddered. Ruth noticed and asked, what's wrong? Why do you have that expression? Don't you touch bones when you eat meat? Massey stammered, but the bones of magical creatures are different, aren't they? At that moment, as Kristen was walking away, he turned back to his wife and said, Massey, you should head back now. She hesitated, but what about you? Kristen replied, I need to escort the intruders away and meet the messenger from Arden. Ruth and Hebizon will take you back to the castle. And get ready for the campaign. Hebizon sighed, I was planning to stay in bed a bit longer. Ruth remarked, weren't you complaining about feeling sore when you're in the castle? Hebizon mounted his horse, you try sleeping with bones sticking into you. Ruth responded indifferently, I think I'll pass. A delicate and fragile mage like me might not survive even a cold winter. Hebizon was taken aback, delicate and fragile? Among the Gendragon Knights, no one has a stronger spirit than you. Ruth, unbothered, replied, that's just your opinion. Massey watched them and smiled to herself, thinking, I'm not sure if their relationship is good or bad, but somehow, seeing them like this makes me happy. Ruth suddenly stopped his horse and said, wait a moment. Before we return to the castle, let's stop by the market. We're out of herbs and magic stones. I've been so busy making magical tools that I haven't had time to go out. Hebizon sighed, come on, personal errands like that should be done on your own time. He glanced back with a mutter. Massey, riding on her horse, noticed his awkward look and quickly lowered her head, trying to avoid eye contact. She thought, so they find me inconvenient? Is it because of me, ? Ruth promptly spoke up, can you drop that attitude? Lady Caleb is not a nuisance to be avoided. Hebizon tried to defend himself, I didn't say that. Ruth cut him off, even with the lady right in front of you, you act like this? Enough already. With winter coming, merchants selling goods for women won't be around for a while, so if the lady needs anything, she should buy it now. Massey hesitated, Ruth, He pressed, don't you want to see what the market in Anatole looks like? Massey lowered her head, thinking, that's right, I'm now the lady of Calip Castle, of this territory. She hesitated before saying, well then, let's go. As they entered the market, Ruth beamed with satisfaction, clutching his newly purchased items. Despite his feigned complaints, he said, the quality isn't great, but it's worth using. The other two thought to themselves, asterisk he's lying. He bought every kind of herb and took all the magic stones they had, asterisk. Massey looked at him curiously, speaking of which, Ruth, why did that merchant weigh your silver coin earlier? Ruth explained, to check if it's genuine. Lately, there have been many counterfeit coins. Some people even create new coins by shaving off tiny bits from each coin. Massey was shocked, shaving coins? Ruth shrugged and confirmed, yes. If you put a bunch of coins in a basket and shake it, gold dust falls off. They collect it and make a new gold coin. Repeating this process, the original coins lose significant weight due to the material loss. Massey hesitated, so this? Ruth quickly reassured her, there's nothing to worry about. My coins are mostly new, so there's no difference. Hebazon chimed in, is that why you were so stingy over a single coin? Ruth retorted, I'm just smart and prudent. At that moment, Massey's attention was caught by something. She stared at it, what's that over there? A table full of colorful strings? Ruth, what is this for? When she turned around, Ruth was nowhere to be seen. Massey looked around, and suddenly someone spoke, startling her, these are decorations for sword sheaths. Massey turned to see Hebazon explaining, many adventurers believe that having these can grant them the protection of spirits. He pointed out, it would be tied right here. Massey, feeling confused, clenched her hands, Sir Nerda, she stammered, I've never seen that before. Kristen's sword sheath doesn't have these decorations, so. Hebazon sighed, that's because the leader thinks such things are useless. His personality is too confident to be obsessed with superstitions. Massey chuckled, I guess that's true. Feeling embarrassed about his previous rudeness, Hebazon stammered like Massey, still, if it were a gift from you, he might attach it and carry it. How about, you try picking one? Massey hesitantly asked, is it expensive? Hebazon replied, not at all. Do you like the one you're holding? Here, buy this one. Then he tossed her a gold coin, adding, keep the change. Massey exclaimed, wow. I really like all the men here in Anatole. They're so generous and decisive. Massey stammered, Sir Nerda. She ran after him, saying politely, I'll pay you back when we get back to the castle. Hebazon sighed, all right, I'm not as stingy as a certain magician. Then he yelled, wizard. Walk with us. If you keep wandering off alone, how are we supposed to find you? Massey cringed at his way of calling for Ruth. On the way back, Ruth asked Hebazon, who decided to join this expedition. Hebazon proudly replied, me, Gabor, and we're also planning to take a few apprentice knights. It's about time they gained some real combat experience. Ruth smiled with satisfaction, that's true, the castle will be quieter. Hebazon teased, look at that, we should tell the leader to drag the wizard out as well. They started bickering, Lord Calip wouldn't do that because when something happens at the castle, it's reassuring to have me here. Hebazon smirked, great excuse. Fine, enjoy the peace and quiet while we're gone. Massey followed behind, watching the two argue tirelessly along the way. Hebazon smiled, we'll clear out that mountain and be back in no time, then we'll train loudly right next to your tower. Ruth hurried off excitedly, saying, I'll go ahead and prepare everything. Continuing to tease, he remarked, don't let the fairies ambush you. Massey followed behind them, looking up at the sky and admiring the surroundings. Ruth turned back and said, I'm heading back too, but first, I need to catch up on some sleep. That cursed magical tool has kept me up like a bat for the past few days. You've been a lifesaver, too. Without your help, I'd probably need another 3 or 4 days. Massey smiled, saying, I'm glad I could help you out. Ruth cheerfully replied, I'll return the favor sometime soon. Feeling a bit awkward from being teased, Massey responded tersely, what do you mean? Ruth spurred her horse forward and urged, come on, let's head back. A happy smile appeared on Massey's lips as she thought, could there be a day when I can share a comfortable atmosphere without hesitation between Ruth and Nerta? Being with Kristen and everyone else, laughing and talking naturally, staying here with these familiar images. If I could be accepted as a member of them in this way, how would it feel? In their room, Massey's hair was carefully brushed, and Christian looked at his wife in the mirror, full of satisfaction. All set, Massey. She looked at him gently and said, "Thank you, Christian." The husband that all sisters dream of then kissed her on the forehead and said with tender words, "I won't be able to hold your hand in the coming days, so we must make the most of it. How about it? My skills are quite good now, aren't they?" Massey unexpectedly turned back and kissed Christian on the cheek, leaving him stunned with the joy of the unexpected reward. She blushed and explained, "It's a kiss of gratitude." He gazed fondly at his lovely wife, then hugged Massey tightly, murmuring, "If you didn't do that, I wouldn't want to leave anywhere. You really make it hard for me to go." She hesitated, "I didn't do anything." Christian smiled, "You make such adorable gestures and still deny it like that?" Meanwhile, little Rudy stood outside, painfully witnessing this display of affection, but they continued. He leaned down, touching Massey's face, tenderly advising, "Wait until I return to see." As he left, he muttered regretfully. At this moment, Massey hesitated to say something. She handed him the string she bought at the market. "This is what I purchased yesterday on our way back. Nerda said that if this is tied to the sword's sheath, it will be protected by spirits, so I..." She blushed, embarrassed. "Even though the money was provided by Nerda, I chose it, though it's nothing special. But if it helps..." She looked at him with a disappointed pout. "I guess I've done something useless then. If I had brought different colors, like red and orange, for example, it might not suit Christian at all." She felt dejected. If he doesn't like it, then he doesn't need such frivolous gifts. Before she could finish, Christian reached for the present. "Give it to me." Massey stared at him in astonishment. His ears turned red, and he turned away, trying to conceal his embarrassment. Christian glanced back, then he hugged his wife tightly. "Thank you. I'll cherish it carefully. I'll return right away. Please wait for me." Massey felt elated, thinking, "If I had known he would like it this much, I would have prepared a more decent gift. He's a hero, after all. Even though he's deserving of everyone's love and praise, he's still happy with just a simple gift like this." She buried herself into his embrace, reminding him once again, "Be careful and come back to me safely." She silently vowed to herself, "In the future, I must give this man so much more. Everything I have to offer will be for him." 2 days after he left for the expedition, the first frost had covered Anatole. In the castle room, a servant was sewing. Rudy sat in a corner carefully stitching warm clothes. Suddenly, she looked up and noticed Lady Calip staring blankly. She sighed and spoke to her mistress. "The castle is really quiet, isn't it, my lady?" Massey started and looked at Rudy. They both gazed out the frost-covered window, taking in the entire garden. Rudy said, "Around this time, it feels like the whole castle is sinking into hibernation." Massey stammered, "I heard Anatole doesn't get too cold in the winter." Rudy nodded, "Yes, because this place is in a basin. Even in the middle of winter, the weather is warmer compared to other areas. But this year is a bit different." Rudy suddenly smiled, "But don't worry, my lady. Dry firewood and warm clothes have almost all been prepared. They say that in 3 days, all the servants will receive their winter clothes, thanks to your careful planning. You have really worked hard." Massey awkwardly grasped her hand. No, I haven't done much at all." She bit her lip, her cheeks turning red from the compliment. Massey smiled, "I'm very glad I could get it done in time." Rudy smiled to herself. "Since the Lord left, my lady, your expression has been dark, but it seems your mood has improved a bit." Rudy put away her sewing tools and said, "I'll go prepare lunch now. From what I overheard in the kitchen, today's menu includes braised chicken with peas, smoked sausages, and pumpkin pie drenched in honey and cinnamon bark for dessert." Massey's mouth watered as she exclaimed, "That sounds wonderful." At that moment, there was a knock on the door. "My lady, the butler has sent me. I apologize for disturbing you while you're resting, but the mage says there's an urgent matter, so I have bring him here." Massey immediately stood up. "Come in." Ruth entered with a very serious expression. Massey, worried, asked, "What has happened?" Ruth, in a grave tone, replied, "At dawn, the monsters climbed over the city walls and infiltrated the camp." Massey was horrified. "Monsters?" Ruth recounted. "The knights and guards quickly suppressed them, but it seems we have suffered significant losses and need additional reinforcements. My lady, can you select about 15 or 16 servants from the castle who can be spared? Since we are far from the market area, please quickly gather the necessary items for treating the wounded. The urgent needs now are clean cloth, pots for boiling water, wooden splints, thread, and needles. Oh, and we also need herbs and food supplies." Massey's heart raced with anxiety. Monsters have breached the city walls. What are we going to do? And now, Kristen isn't here either. She stammered, "Ready, go." The butler bowed. "I will tell them to prepare right away." She then said, "Give the order, Ruth. Request support from the temple." Ruth replied, "There are no priests in this area who can use holy magic." He scratched his head. Anatole has been isolated for a long time. It wasn't until recent years, with Lord Calip's growing reputation, that this place was brought into the parish. So, there's no way we would have a high-ranking priest here. Massey was so terrified she felt dizzy. Does that mean Ruth is the only one in Anatole who can use healing magic? What if something even bigger happens? At this moment, Ruth snapped his fingers. "My lady, save your worries for later. First, go prepare the servants. I'll gather the herbs." Massey, with determination, said, "I understand. I'll get ready right away." She reminded herself, "That's right, I am the lady of Calip Castle. With Kristen not here, I must handle this decisively." A while later, as Ruth was carrying the supplies, he looked at Massey in surprise. "My lady, are you planning to go as well?" She asked. "If I go, will I be a hindrance to everyone?" Ruth shook his head. "No, not at all. I was just a bit surprised." He smiled. "It would be very helpful if you came with me. Come on, get in the carriage first." Massey smiled brightly at his words and climbed into the carriage with Ruth. The two sat facing each other inside. He suddenly spoke up. "My lady, have you ever treated injured people before?" Massey shook her head. "No, I haven't." Ruth thought for a moment, then took out 2 pouches and said, "My lady, please take these." Massey looked puzzled. "What are these?" He explained, "They are a hemostatic medicine and an antidote. The situation there will be quite chaotic, so it's better to explain before we arrive. The pouch on the left contains the hemostatic medicine, and the black pouch contains the antidote. When using the hemostatic medicine, first cut away the clothing around the wound to prevent it from sticking. After cleaning the wound with water, sprinkle the medicine on it. Once the bleeding stops, press down with a clean cloth to control the bleeding. If the wound swells and turns purple, or if someone develops a fever, give them the herbs from the black pouch." Ruth nodded in agreement. Yes, the claws or nails of the monsters may contain toxins, so any delay could indeed become dangerous. Massey hesitated. "What about using healing magic?" Ruth sighed. "My magic is limited to those with severe injuries. For others, they need direct treatment. Among the servants, there are quite a few who have experience with situations like this. Just give them simple instructions, and they'll know what to do. So, my lady, don't be too tense, and let's care for the wounded together. If you encounter any difficulties, just call me." Massey hugged the medicine pouch tightly. "I understand." Ruth smiled. "Good. Then let's go with firm determination." Not long after, the carriage arrived at the destination. Ruth and Massey got off the carriage. Massey glanced to the side and saw a pool of blood where a wolf had been slain. She covered her mouth to prevent herself from vomiting. Ruth glanced over casually. "A werewolf, huh? If these creatures sneakily climb the city walls at night, it's not surprising if we didn't detect them. We need to establish countermeasures." At that moment, there was a loud scream. "The mage!" Several soldiers hurriedly ran over. Finally, the mage arrived and quickly followed us to the other side. Ruth asked them what happened. They explained in panic that Lord Rickadoo had been injured in the shoulder. Ruth was surprised. "Rickadoo? What happened?" They explained that the thick morning fog obscured the signal for help, so it wasn't seen. When Ruth arrived late, Rickadoo was facing a large group of werewolves. Massey suddenly felt a bit scared. Should I also come along? The soldiers shouted, there's no time to hesitate anymore. Over here. Massey hesitated for a moment, then called out to Ruth, Ruth. He looked sternly at her. Have you remembered everything I said? First, tell the servants to boil water immediately. We will need a lot of hot water. She nodded. I understand. Massey turned to the servants and said, did you hear that? Hurry, gather firewood. She looked at the medicine pouch in her clothes and said loudly, and others, bring clean cloth and bandages with me. As soon as Massey entered the tent, she had to cover her mouth to prevent herself from vomiting at the scene inside. People were in chaos, shouting, over here. Apply pressure. Damn it, we're out of bandages. Someone bring more. Massey looked around, overwhelmed by the strong smell of blood. She hesitated, this is the first time I've seen so many injured people like this. What can I do here? They screamed, we need more hemostatic medicine. Hearing them mention the medicine she was holding, Massey tightened her grip on the pouch, reassuring herself, stay calm. She spoke loudly, I'll check on that. Massey reminded herself, I came here to help them, not to hinder. She followed Ruth's instructions, cutting the clothing away, removing the clothes around the wound first, then cleaning the wound with clean water. She suddenly hesitated when she heard the wounded person's moans, I'm sorry, just a little bit more, just a little bit. Please bear with the pain. She thought to herself, wet and slippery, I feel like vomiting because of the strong smell of blood, but I can't mess up the order. First, sprinkle the hemostatic medicine, then apply pressure with the bandage to stop the bleeding, and after the bleeding stops. She breathed out anxiously, okay. I followed what Ruth taught. I must have done it right. If there's no bleeding or fever, it should be fine. She discreetly glanced at those around her, all busy bandaging wounds. Massey sighed in relief, everyone is treating in the same way. That's good, just keep doing that. Next person. Massey called out loudly. Suddenly, she froze in horror. Oh, this. Their bone. Bone is protruding? What should I do now? Should I call Ruth? But Ruth is currently treating Lord Ricardo. Massey quickly grabbed a cloth. Okay, first, I need to clean the wound. Behind her, someone suddenly reminded her, Madam, don't touch that person. Massey startled and turned around to look, relieved to see Ruth. He sat down and said, in this case, the bone needs to be reset first. This task alone is a bit too much for me. Can you lend me a hand? Massey nodded determinedly. I can do this. After a loud crack, Ruth exclaimed, all right. The bone has been reset. You need to hold it tightly like this until the healing magic begins. She closed her eyes tightly. It's easier said than done. Suddenly, a light appeared, causing her to open her eyes. It was Ruth using healing magic. Massey gazed at the light dazedly, suddenly recalling a painful past. It's strange, on that day, there was also a light that struck me, causing unbearable pain. She reached out and touched it. I always thought healing magic was colder than ice and only brought pain. Why is this light so soft and warm? The victim, after being treated, fell comfortably asleep. Ruth stared intently at the victim, noting that there was still poison in their body. Massey jumped when she heard about the poison. Ruth reminded, if he wakes up, give him the antidote, but it's difficult to swallow, so it's better to soak it in hot water and have him drink it sip by sip. Massey immediately stood up. I'll go boil the water. Ruth massaged her tired shoulders. Yes, please, madam. In the meantime, I'll rest for a bit. Massey looked at her with concern. Ruth seems too exhausted. Healing magic seems to consume more energy than I thought. She resolved, I have to be strong too. Let me try once, and maybe the next treatment will be better. Massey looked around. First, ask the servants to prepare a pot and boiling water, and also prepare firewood. She suddenly realized that the smell outside the camp was getting stronger. Massey froze, looking at the fire. Is that the smell of burning flesh? People around shouted, "Quick, burn it faster. Stay away from the smoke, it might be poisonous." Massey looked at the bloodstains on the ground. Wait, so that means... She covered her mouth, the smell I've been noticing all this time. Massey couldn't hold back and vomited immediately. She stood under a tree, continuously retching. Massey breathed heavily, unable to bear it. She trembled, shocked by how horrendous the smell of burning bodies could be, and how everyone seemed to endure it as if nothing was wrong. Then she suddenly remembered that she was supposed to be boiling the herbs and taking them to the victims. Suddenly, a knight spoke up, "Hey! What's going on here?" He was surprised to see her. Lady Calip, what are you doing here?" She tried to explain, "It's nothing, I was just going to get some firewood." The knight noticed the vomit under the tree and stood there quietly for a moment before disdainfully saying, "Lady, you shouldn't be here. You should return to the castle immediately." She tried to justify herself, "I'm fine, you don't need to worry." He glanced at her and said, "As the wife of the leader, wandering around like this is unacceptable to me. Stop wasting time and return immediately." Then he shouted, "Hey, guards! Bring a carriage here to take the lady back to the castle." Massey took a few steps back, then suddenly stopped in front of him. The soldier looked at her suspiciously, "Lady Calip?" Massey replied firmly, her mind filled with the knight's disrespectful words from earlier, when considering the situation at the camp, it's natural for the wife of the lord to appear here. "I will fulfill my duty, sir." "What authority do you have to call me useless?" The knight looked puzzled. Massey scolded herself, "Don't stumble over your words, speak confidently given the circumstances." She bowed her head, "Please, don't worry about me, sir. Just do as you wish." After that, she ran away. The soldier called out, "Wait a moment, madam." But he stood frozen, watching her go. Massey ran while worrying, "What now? I've said it all. Could he possibly think his words are arrogance? Oh well, it's okay. They don't like me anyway." She suddenly stopped and looked into the distance. Massey imagined if that group of knights. Tears streamed down her face, "Even if they hated me a bit more, nothing would change." "Yes, that matter isn't anything at all." A gentle figure entered the tent. Massey spoke up, "Ruth, I've told you. I brought some herbs and clean cloth. Is everything okay now?" Ruth, in the midst of using magical healing, turned back to look at her. Massey watched him anxiously, "Are you still using magic to heal? Take a break." Ruth replied, "I see the patients are in urgent need. Sitting still is difficult." Massey reassured her, "It's okay. All the crises have been resolved. Thanks to that, my strength is also depleted, but I'll return to normal in about half a day." Massey asked, "Should we invite a village doctor?" Ruth explained that in Anatole, there's only one healer who can treat them, and we can't ask them to leave their clinic. So it's better to take the patients from this side over there. However, the clinic space cannot accommodate them all, so I'll have to take the poisoned or severely feverish patients on the horse carriage, while I'll handle the others myself. Massey silently wondered, "Are we including ourselves in this?" She asked, "What should I do?" Ruth replied confidently, "It's not difficult at all. I'll apply poultices to the swollen wounds, splint broken bones, and stitch up any lacerations." Massey panicked, "Stitch up?" Ruth stood up, "I'll handle that. You just need to be here to support me." She smiled, "Oh, and some of the methods may be a bit unconventional from Southern, so it might seem strange to you. Just focus on assisting me." Massey nodded, "I'll do my best." Then the two of them were busy until late into the night like that, exhausted beyond measure. Massey sat outside by the campfire, recalling how she had to assist Ruth earlier, prepare the supplies, help Ruth administer medicine to the patients, then apply warm compresses to the wounds. While Ruth stitched up the wounds, Massey soaked cloth in alcohol. She cried from exhaustion, "I can't even move another finger." Ruth brought over a pile of dirty cloths to comfort her, "Take a rest by the fire. I'll take care of these." Massey sat by the campfire, deep in thought, "So this is the first time we've worked together like this. Thanks to Ruth's patient teaching, I haven't made any major mistakes. I've learned a lot of miraculous knowledge, like using strong alcohol to clean wounds if there's a head injury or excessive bleeding. Otherwise, using high-proof alcohol can reduce the severity of the wound. What's the principle behind it? Southern medicine? Ruth knows a lot of things. Just then, someone called out to her, Lady Maximilian. The soldier from earlier appeared, looking awkward. If you're okay, please have some of this. It's rabbit stew. He held out a pot of soup to her, sheepishly apologetic. It might not be as good as the food in the castle, but it's edible. Massey hesitated, looking at him. Why is that knight giving this to me? Earlier. She was about to refuse, but her stomach growled before she could speak. Massey, embarrassed, thought, I haven't eaten lunch. She accepted it and thanked him. The soldier instructed, it's nothing. Eat it before it gets cold. She then sat down by the campfire. Massey took a spoonful, her eyes lighting up immediately as she ate several more spoonfuls in quick succession. It's delicious. The soldier watched her, looking a bit embarrassed. She suddenly stopped when she noticed his awkward expression. Feeling flustered, Massey asked him, what is it? Why? Is there something you want to say? He bowed his head and spoke loudly, I apologize for what happened earlier. Massey looked at him in confusion, not understanding until he continued, as you said, I was too arrogant. I sincerely apologize. Massey, feeling awkward, stammered, no, what I said earlier, it was because I was too sensitive. I apologize. The knight quickly replied, don't apologize to me, I was the one who was disrespectful to you first. You weren't out of line at all. Massey felt touched, if you say so, then thank you. The knight scratched his head, not at all, ma'am. Suddenly, someone walked in, it was Duke Carton. Ruth looked at them, puzzled. What's going on here? Is there a problem? Massey explained, no, not at all. This man was just. The knight interjected, I was apologizing to the lady for my rudeness earlier. Ruth looked at them with confusion. What? If there's no problem, then fine. He put something down and continued, by the way, the knights who were sent to scout beyond the wall have returned. It seems there are no remaining werewolves in the vicinity. Lady, you can stop your work and return to the castle. Massey asked, withdraw? I thought I would have to stay up all night here. Ruth brushed off his hands, I'll likely have to stay here all day anyway. There might still be people with fevers, and when my magical strength recovers, I can treat a few more. You've done enough, milady. He looked at her kindly, this is enough. Leave the rest to us. Massey hesitated, then. She still felt uncertain. Is it because I'm too worried? I thought I did well and tried my best, but am I really just a hindrance to them? Ruth sighed and said, look over here for a moment. He smiled, honestly, you have helped me a lot, but there would be a big problem if Lord Callip hears that his lady stayed up all night in a commoner's house. Now, Massey finally understood. He advised, just rest before you return to the castle. That way, we can be at ease. The knight immediately volunteered, I'll watch over the lady. Massey sighed, it's really unfortunate, but being stubborn like this won't do any good. If I exhaust myself and faint from overworking, I'll just become more of a burden. She nodded in agreement, I understand, let's do that. Ruth, don't overwork yourself. If you need any support, just let me know. He smiled, don't worry about that, milady. Then he turned and said, I'll head back inside now.